but we sometimes have anywhere from 10 to 20 people on the combination of Zoom and Facebook Live. And then it's hard to know like how many people go back and watch afterwards. But I mean, I think they're growing bit by bit.
Okay, we're live on Facebook and Zoom, so.
Okay, sounds good. Well, thanks everybody for coming. My name is Heather Keeler. I'm one of the candidates running for House 4A. Welcome to Town Hall Tuesday. We're going to be kind of just having conversations about how the House and the Senate at a state level work together. What are some of the things that we've been working on in this district? But then also, just because I believe it's so important that we focus on collaboration and working together, I have Kent Eken with us and Ben Lien. And so it'll be nice for us to talk about how we plan a transition and how we're already working together to communicate things and how we hope to move forward together effectively to create the change that our community is continuously looking for. So Kent, we'll start with you. If you can just tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about the areas that you serve, because you know, your district is different than how the House works. And then maybe how long you've been in politics and what was kind of the driving force to get you interested in politics.
Sure. Well, thanks, Heather, and thank you for hosting this event tonight. I live on a fourth generation family farm, which I'm in the farmhouse right now. It's the farmhouse that my great grandparents built. So our roots run fairly deep in this community. I farmed in partnership with my brothers, but I've been a teacher, a high school teacher for a number of years. So education's been big for me. And my wife, Lori, and I have raised our 4 children here, 3 of whom now have left the nest. One is going to college in Moorhead. One is teaching high school down in Winona. Another one is working at BTD Industries in Detroit Lakes. And we still have one at home here who's a sophomore in high school now. The reason that we got involved in politics, that my family got directly involved in participatory democracy, was really when my family discovered that my brother, I had an older brother who was 2 years older than me, who was intellectually disabled. And it wasn't immediately apparent, but he was slow to walk and he was slow to talk. And they brought him in to be evaluated. He was diagnosed with intellectual disability and told that they had one of 2 options. One was to send him away to be institutionalized, where he'd be living like 100 miles away from home, but he'd get some rudimentary training. The other option was keep him at home, but he would receive no education because there was no special education program in this area of the state. And that's what really motivated my family to get directly involved in our government and in politics. I mean, they'd always been involved in voting, but this was when they really got involved in a movement to start a special education program for the intellectually disabled children in our area. So my parents got involved in that. They were successful in that. And it actually led to my dad running for the House. And he served for 14 years in the House, where he eventually chaired the Education Committee. And he himself had never gone on to higher education. He planned to be a farmer his whole life, but that changed the direction of his life. And we as a family came to understand how important politics is to the lives of everyday people. And so that was the real motivating event in our family's life, I guess. And so I grew up around politics. I remember my dad, I was only 6 years old when my dad ran for the House, and I'd been involved since the beginning in helping. I remember painting signs for him. Back then, they didn't have these manufactured signs. We made our own signs back then, so just plywood boards that we painted names on. So I have real fond memories. Actually, some people think of politics as taking families apart because you have to devote so much time to it. But for me, it was a time where I really connected with Dad and our family, doing things together. And so I did a lot with him. So that really sparked my interest and inspired me to want to get involved. And because they were successful starting that special education program, it made me feel like my dad's not with us any longer. My brother unfortunately passed away when he was only 12 years old in an accident on our farm. But that special ed program that my brother helped to inspire and that my parents helped to start is still going. And so even though, they left something behind that's going to be a positive impact on people's lives for years to come, long after they've been gone. So I wanted to be a part of that. It inspired me to want to do something like that. And I did serve in the House for 10 years and then ran for the Senate 8 years ago. So I'm in my second term in the Senate now and running for my third term.
Do you want to talk about what communities your district includes?
Sure. Yeah, I represent all of Norman County, which is my home county where Twin Valley is, my hometown, and also represent all of Clay County, including Moorhead. Then I represent 3.5 townships in Becker County, including Detroit Lakes. So the population centers are Moorhead and Detroit Lakes, and a lot of other smaller towns and cities in Clay and in Norman County. And I serve on, right now I'm serving on the agriculture, rural development, housing committees, both finance and policy. I also serve on the bonding committee, the capital investment committee, which is very important if getting the funds we need for our infrastructure, maintaining, fixing, and improving on our infrastructure. And I also serve on the family care and aging committee, which I'm the minority lead on. I have a special interest in making sure that we're providing for our most vulnerable citizens. I mentioned education already being a very important issue for me and my family, making sure that everybody has access to good quality education, because that is, after all, the source of opportunity, and we want to be the land of opportunity here in Minnesota. But also making sure that we're providing for those with disabilities and seniors who need long-term care services, and family care, dealing with daycare issues, which is a real important issue, and we're facing a real crisis in that area as well. So that committee deals with the child care issues and with aging issues and long-term care issues.
That's great. One of the things that you talked about that I think is really interesting is that, you learned a lot from your dad. I think it's funny that you said you had to make the signs and just what that does. I was just actually in the office earlier today, and me and my teenager were making our buttons together. And it's so neat that, so I didn't grow up at all with anybody who was involved in any type of leadership bigger than just community volunteering, really. And so it's nice to see that when somebody gets involved, it plants these seeds of connectability, and you're teaching the next generations that our voices are so important. I think you're an example of that I hope that that's what I'm doing, with my kids, and really showing them, a path and an opportunity that, we haven't really had that opportunity in our family yet. So thanks for sharing that story. That's really cool. It's just neat to see. And also that the work that your dad did is something that's still carrying on. I think that's what we all do this for, is that we're trying to really plant seeds that will impact, our next generation and years to come. It's not necessarily just something that's going to make a change this year and, be changed again next year, that really planting those seeds to, grow long-term change. So yeah, we'll come back to a couple of things, but Ben, I want to come over to you. I really have always appreciated your openness to chat with me from the minute I decided that I was going to do this. I reached out to Ben, and he was really open to talk about, some of the challenges, some of the honesty that comes with being a candidate, being from greater Minnesota, being from a border city, just really connecting about some of the things that we uniquely kind of talk about in our community, but also Ben and I have been kind of working on a plan to stay in touch on a pretty weekly basis about different things, because we both really, really care about Moorhead and want to make sure that in the transition, we're setting ourselves up to be successful in our community. But Ben, do you want to talk kind of about some of the same things? How did you get involved? What sparked you to want to run to represent Moorhead at a state level? And then kind of like Kent did, what are some of the areas that you're currently involved in as a House representative?
Absolutely. And thank you, Heather, for you and your team for putting this together and making this happen. I also want to thank you for being a very strong and very dynamic candidate. I know you have a lot of compassion for people. I know you have a lot of passion for our community and not just making Moorhead a better community, but really being there to be a voice for folks that haven't maybe necessarily been so involved in politics. I just think this year, more than many other years, possibly in our lifetimes, this year is just going to be so important at the polls. It's so important for these elections. And so to be in a position where I'm at, where I'm not going to be running again, and to be seeing you, Heather, to be in a position to be taking this on, not just for Moorhead and the DFL and all that, but like I say, for people who haven't necessarily been really involved with politics, it's a really good feeling to have, just knowing that you're so strong and you're so compassionate and you really want to do this. I know in the conversations we've had over the last couple of weeks, I can just tell you really want to dig into these issues and want to help people, want to be a champion for people. And so that's just really encouraging from my perspective, knowing that we have a very strong DFL candidate to keep the Moorhead seat blue. I think that that just really speaks well for you, especially, like me, not having an elected position before, to just dive right into a state legislative seat. It's just for what it's worth, it makes me feel really proud to know that you are working to to continue on as the Moorhead legislator. So I do want to say thank you for that. My name is Ben Lien. I've been serving Moorhead, or I should say Minnesota House District 4A, which is Moorhead and Oakport Township, for the last 8 years. This is my fourth term. I have decided not to run for re-election, and I have been sitting on the property tax and tax committee, the higher education committee. Really, ever since I've been in office, I have been on those committees. I've spent some time with the Ag Committee. I've also done a lot with Greater Minnesota Jobs and really working on what I like to call that workforce infrastructure that we really need. I travel the state, and when I hear from people, business owners, tell me, some of the biggest challenges for business owners, it's not always taxes that come to the top of the list. I mean, that is a big issue. I will say, and we do have to find ways to help small businesses meet some of those challenges, but it's things like finding workers out there, finding affordable health care for their employees, finding childcare, housing, transportation, broadband internet. These are all what I really like to refer to as that workforce infrastructure that we need to keep Greater Minnesota strong. I mean, to keep Minnesota's economy strong, because we have really been a cornerstone in terms of having a strong economy for the state. We came out of the Great Recession stronger, I should say faster than most other states. We rebounded a lot of our jobs. We got our state's fiscal house in order much faster than other states. And I think it's just really a testament, not only to the hard work that Minnesotans want to put in, and not just for their businesses, but for their communities, but also to the educational institutions and educational, I should just say, access to education that we have. And I know Kent's dad, he really put in a lot of work, and that is a legacy that stands today. I've really wanted to focus on higher education, with Moorhead having just so much higher education in our district. It made perfect sense to me to be on that committee, but also recognizing what I understand as higher education really is that key for people to better themselves, to move up in their socio economic mobility, to really just make a better life for themselves and a better life for their children. I think that's really what Minnesota needs to continue to be proud of, and really needs to continue to build on. So with that, I can answer some additional questions Heather has, or if we're going to open it up to folks who are viewing this town hall. I'd really like to hear from folks and answer questions to the best of my ability when I can. So thanks again, Heather, to you and your team.
Yeah, thanks for coming. I think that it's really important that we kind of show the community the fact that we do communicate with each other. I think that it's important that we lead by example, that working together we can create so much. One of the things and one of the messages that all three of us, I think, talk about in the greater pocket of things is education, whether that's early education, K-12, higher ed, special ed. I think all of us find education really important. Each of you mentioned that and talked about like access to education. I think that education should be an opportunity for everybody and not a privilege for some, based on the family that you come from. I share my story a lot when it comes to education. I wasn't able to go back to college to get my bachelor's until I was in my 30s, and I was working full time and I had kids and trying to juggle being a full-time student just to be able to try to advance in life. Like, education is attached to so many bigger opportunities, to provide for your family and yourself. And so let's kind of dig in a little bit about just education in general. I know one of the things that Ben has been talking about with some of our local higher ed, and Kent, jump in if this is something that you're working on too. It's something that we talk a lot about in Moorhead School District. 97% of our teachers are from non-minority backgrounds or white teachers. And yet that's not super reflective of our student population. And so for me growing up, I didn't see people who looked like me. I didn't see teachers who looked like me. And I think that subliminally that tells you like it's really hard for us to be a teacher, or when doctors don't look like you, or lawyers or law enforcement. And so representation matters in those areas. And so one of the things we've been talking a lot about, and that I hear when I'm on the phone with community members, and Ben, I think it's something that you've been working on quite a bit, is how do we create a system that we help our minority students graduate and then come back and be teachers, because that cycle has to start somewhere. And like we hear from HR departments saying, well, we don't have a lot of minority individuals that are even applying for jobs, so that's kind of the reason why they don't have a lot to hire. But I think we need to go back a little bit further, because we can already start to see the gap at third grade in the divide in our reading scores, that who's starting to excel as early as third grade. And then we see it in, middle school, and our graduation rates, and who goes to college yet graduate and get a license. So what are some ideas that you have either started implementing, or the conversations that you're a part of, in how we can move forward to increase our minority teachers in rural Minnesota? Either of you can start first.
Sure. I first want to say, Heather, hearing you tell that part of your story, again, just speaks so much volumes that you have these lived experiences. And so when you're talking about issues, these are very personal for you. And I know that, you care about these issues in as much as you care about the people that they impact, because, just from hearing your story, not so long ago, you were in that same place trying to raise your kids and go back to school and all these things. So, again, I just think it speaks volumes for how strong you are going to be down in St. Paul. Just knowing that you have lived these experiences. You're not just talking about these issues, you've lived these issues. And so, I just think that really that you will be a strong champion for Moorhead down in St. Paul. And to answer your question, from the higher education perspective, I'm going to start with tuition, making sure that the state has, really, it's a commitment. we always talk about budgets being moral documents, and being willing to put money where people's mouths are and fund education, to fund tuition so that it's not falling on the backs of students, so that we're not having campus cuts and faculty cuts and department cuts, which in the end are just going to hurt communities and are just going to hurt students and just going to hurt people's education. To me, that's really where the focus needs to be. And not only having, you know, the attention to put funding into tuition, but also to be asking the questions of the U of M and the Minnesota state system, who I do work with very well. But we have to ask these questions. You know, what are you doing with these tuition, or with these state dollars that are going into your campuses? How are they getting into the classrooms? How are they getting into helping students finish their degrees and get into the workforce and some of those things? And I would also add, it's a newer idea, or a newer bill program that's come up in the legislature lately, but the Teachers of Color program, which are basically grants for teachers of color, teaching candidates of color, so student teachers, to help them get into the classrooms. And we started a little bit on this just this last session, myself and the Rural Minnesota Education Association, working on a rural teaching candidate grant, which would be very similar to the existing Teachers of Color program. It would be two separate programs, and the Office of Higher Education thought that would be better for admin purposes, so that we don't have so much competition for the same limited dollars. But the idea being that people in Greater Minnesota who commit to teaching in Greater Minnesota and that are lower income, coming from lower income families as student teachers and teacher candidates, that they have access to those grant dollars. And some of the thinking also is that it is going to help, although it's for Greater Minnesota teaching candidates, it is going to help teaching candidates of color. And, you know, in this part of the state, a lot of that is, of course, Indigenous teachers, in addition to Black and Brown teachers, you know, just making sure we really have the resources. And like I say, to have the commitment to get people into the classroom who can reach, you know, all students on a different, in a different way, in a more personal, lived experience sort of way. I think those are two really important things we need to keep focus on. Just general tuition relief and tuition help for all students, but then really focusing on those teaching candidates of color.
And I would have to echo what Ben is saying here. I think is so right that first we need to focus on making sure that higher education generally is accessible to people of all means. That it shouldn't matter, you know, what the financial background or position of your family is. Everyone should have that opportunity, and everybody benefits from that, because the wider net that we cast in our higher education and education generally, the more we're going to develop people's talents and abilities, and the more they're going to contribute back to our society. So it's incumbent upon us to ensure that everybody has that opportunity, regardless of where they live, regardless of financial background, regardless of race or ethnicity, regardless of anything. Everybody should have that opportunity, and so that's first and foremost. But I agree, Heather, that we need to do even more in terms of trying to create more diversity among our teachers, to ensure that we have role models from all backgrounds, from all races, and to ensure that again there are models for young people to look up to. That I think is so important to ensuring that everybody does have that opportunity. So I think targeting, you know, having grants, scholarships, and things of that nature that are oriented towards recruiting and trying to, you know, find those who have the will, who have the ability, make sure that they have the opportunity to go into teaching. And I think we need to do more to play up the importance and the important role that teachers play in our society, so that it becomes something that people really do strive for. And I think we've done a pretty good job in Minnesota, but unfortunately, there have been some who seem to cast our public education in particular in a negative light, when in fact it is the source of opportunity for people in our state and in our country. And we should be holding it up as one of the most noble of professions, is to go into teaching. And again, to recruit people from all backgrounds and to recruit people from all races, and to make, to hopefully create a teaching staff in our state that reflects the population of our state.
Yeah, I'm going to go just a little bit deeper into the conversation, because some of the ideas that I have stems around a couple of things. Like we know that this is the outcome that we want, you know, but like how do you create a space that while kids are in school, they're touched so positively by the school experience that they want to come back. And I think some of that is our curriculum in general. You know, we don't learn about Indigenous history or our African-American history. Like Juneteenth was something I never learned in school. You know, there's a lot with my own culture and my own history that I did not learn in a K-12 setting. I learned it from people in my own community. And so I think for minority students, when we're not even teaching about this well-rounded, honest history and inclusion from K-12, you know, from kindergarten to seniors, it's hard to come back and want to teach about things that aren't reflective of yourself. So to me, I think some of it starts with creating a space on a state level that increases the standards for cultural inclusion in all of our curriculum. You know, we think about it, I feel like often people will say, well, we learned about it in social studies on the second week of March. Do you know what I mean? Like that's not the only time that we should be learning about some component of history that includes diverse backgrounds. You know, we can learn about lacrosse and the history of lacrosse in gym class, the whole session in third grade or whatever. You know what I mean? I think we need to be more creative, but we also need to provide the resources. So if the state's gonna increase a cultural inclusive curriculum and requirements, we have to provide quality resources as well so that teachers are comfortable teaching that. Because I think then as a kid, if I'm sitting in school and I'm learning about myself and I'm learning about history and I'm seeing myself in the books that we're reading and I'm seeing myself in the videos that we're showing and people are talking about it, like then you're engaged a little bit more in education to begin with. So then you start to see like, well, maybe I could come back and do this. But when you're excluded so much just through the curriculum, it's not a very welcoming space to come back and be a teacher. But also, I think Moorhead and our area has a really unique idea. And Ben, I think you touched on it, is we have so many higher education opportunities here, like to do, as I've been talking to Mayor Judd lately, we've talked about this idea of like just this homegrown cycle. You know, how do we get spuds to become dragons or cobbers and then come back and be teachers as spuds? And how do we start that cycle? And you know, how do we do it earlier than junior, senior year? How are we implementing that as early as 5th and 6th grade when we can start to see, you know, the personalities of students? And really there, you can tell people at that age who are compassionate towards other people or who are really patient with teaching or who might be really good with sharing instruction in a way that some people understand differently. And how do we engage them at those earlier implementations? We look at nursing, like how many summer programs do we have that you can go and like practice being a nurse or see what it's like to be in healthcare? Like I feel like almost every school has some sort of summer program to see what life is like in healthcare somehow, but we don't really do that for education. So I think also as far as like grants and scholarships, we need to maybe even invest in that early implementation of like career opportunity for in our middle school going into high school ages. Those are just some of the ideas that I have when it comes to planting the bigger seeds of creating the opportunity for minority teachers, because by the time they get to college, we've already kind of missed a lot of really unique opportunities to engage and embrace them, I guess, in the education system.
Yeah.
No,
And
that's, go ahead, Ken. Go ahead, Senator.
I was just going to say that that I agree, Heather, in regard to the curriculum, that not only should the staff be inclusive and diverse, but the curriculum should be as well. And I taught American history as well as economics and government when I was teaching, and I felt that it was important too to be inclusive and to the textbooks that we use. I think unfortunately they focus too much on rote memorization of facts and dates and are too exclusive of other than the victors in our history. And they've often said that, history is written by the victors. Well, I think that it should include everybody because America is a land of diversity. And if we're going to truly be a diverse land that provides opportunity for all, we need to include all of them in the history that's being taught and written about. So I brought in lots of resources from outside of the textbook for that reason. And I think sometimes the textbooks creates a stale story about American history. We need, I think, bring it more to life and fill it with the life and diversity of our society generally. And so I do agree with that. I think that's important. I think that you're right as far as needing to reach people younger and trying to recruit those who, as you said, are showing real potential. That's something that they have a natural talent in, is being able to connect with people. And you can tell, even early on that some of these people are students in high school and so on are really would make great teachers. And teaching is about more than just knowing your subject matter. It's about being able to connect with others and being able to transmit that knowledge that you have to others. And I think in a way that brings history in particular is something that I had a real interest in trying to bring it to life and to instill an interest in it that doesn't end once you leave the classroom, but just whets people's appetites to learn more. And I've always felt that, the formal education is just the beginning of education. It's not the end. Once formal education ends, that doesn't mean that the education ends. It hopefully whets people's appetites with an intellectual curiosity that continues for the rest of their lives.
Something that I think about, Heather, when you bring up these concepts is the fact, that in addition for students of color, I think it would be really important for white students to hear about a lot of this history and for white students to hear about a lot of the history that traditionally has not been taught to white students. And I say this both in terms of understanding the total history of the United States and, everything that goes into the history of the United States. But as we have such important conversations nowadays about racism and just how systemic racism is in this country, and for a white man, a straight white man, me, these last couple months have been really eye-opening for me, not just in terms of how I talk and think about race, but just, what does that mean to me? What does that mean for my personal history? And so I think when white students would be exposed to, the history of people in the United States, people of color in the United States, I think it also has the potential to go forward to make white students kind of, reflect a little bit or give pause a little bit, just based on how they grow up and they move forward in the world, and just how that has the potential to really shape the future of this country. Not just learning about the past, but okay, now what does that mean for white students, learning more about that history of Black and Brown and Indigenous Americans? What does that mean for me going forward? How am I going to interact with the world going forward? That I have a little bit more understanding about all this. So, really, that's a really excellent point, and something that I just think something like that, a concept like that has such deep value for not just today's students, but for tomorrow's communities and tomorrow's society.
And if I could just take off what Ben was saying too, I do think that, as far as the diversity of what's being taught in history in particular, because it's too often taught from one perspective. And I think what really makes history interesting is that there are so many different perspectives, and they need to be brought in and be part of the discussion and the educational process, because that really is part of what does bring history to life, is presenting these diverse perspectives. And it's important for not just those of color, but also for white students as well, to hear these different perspectives and broaden their perspective on the world and an understanding of the world and of others. I think that's so critically important to a country like ours, especially, which is a democracy. And in order to keep democracy alive, we need to have people understanding each other and have this diversity of perspectives being presented early on. And again, I think that makes us all better in the end.
That's an excellent point, Senator.
Thank you.
I really enjoy where this conversation just went. I mean, because I do think that you're right. Like when we look at the bigger divide that we're feeling right now, a lot of it could be fixed generationally if we're just talking more open about it in our education systems, and gaining this common respect for each other, and better understanding. So I can't see any questions. Nicole, do we have any questions that we need to get to? I like to be really, really mindful of time, and also anybody who might have questions for any of us right now. If not, we can keep going.
I don't see any questions in the chat, but if anybody does have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat and we'll get to them momentarily. Sure.
So one of the other things that I think we both of you kind of touched on a little bit, and again, I'll go into, a story that why it affects me, but it's daycare, and it's how much daycare plays this really important role in our community. When I was in school and working at a job that wasn't really paying much, I think we all know that, especially in the Moorhead area, our average income really is only like $11 or $12 an hour. And so paying for daycare gets really expensive. When I was in school, I had the opportunity to take advantage of a daycare grant while I was in school. It wasn't much, but it was enough to help with about 2 weeks maybe worth of daycare each month, which was really beneficial. But one of the things that comes up in a lot of the conversations that I've been having with the community for a really, really long time, because I used to work at the front desk of one of the elementaries. And so when students would come in late to school or not even show up to school sometimes, and then as I moved in to be a Native American liaison, I worked with students who, same thing, is that sometimes it gets to a point in our community that daycare is, one, really hard to find, or two, rather expensive, that students are staying home to take care of younger siblings just so parents can work to keep food on the table. And that's a very real thing that's happening. And it even gets to the point where, you have maybe a family and one adult is working while the other adult stays home because, daycare just gets too expensive. And I don't want to fall into the path where I want like cheaper daycare and lower our standards, because I think that having really safe standards and making sure our daycares are going through the proper training and that our kids are safe, because like our next generation needs to be safe. We don't want just a cheap daycare system. But what are some ideas and what are some things that you have both worked on to really implement that barrier of daycare and also the opportunity to work and grow as professionals? Ben, you talked about it a little bit when you talked about building that workforce infrastructure and how much daycare has a role in that. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I can. Some things the state has really been focusing on have been not just the CCAP funding, the Child Care Assistance Program funding, getting more assistance for families to afford childcare. That needs to be a big part of this conversation. Of course, we need to maintain the viability of that program. And there has been, we've all been hearing about some of the bad press around that program lately. But that in no way gives any reason to completely cut or gut or eliminate the program. I mean, by doing that, you're just forcing families further and further into poverty. And when I hear a lot of conservatives talk about getting the people to fill these jobs, well, a lot of people, like you say, Heather, that's a new concept to me, that school age kids are not going to school to take care of their younger siblings. We hear more so about parents who aren't working because their paycheck would just go right, to their daycare. And it just doesn't really make sense. So we need to continue the viability of that program. We need to make it stronger, and we need to root out the fraud, absolutely. But just completely trashing the program is no solution at all. And I would also add that we really need to be thinking differently about assistance for childcare providers, whether it's the daycare, community-based daycare centers, whether it's the in-home based childcare. We really need to be doing more for those folks to keep their businesses viable, whether it's more startups, just to get more providers in our communities, or just ongoing assistance. I know a lot of times existing business owners get frustrated when the legislature talks so much about help for new businesses, and the existing businesses are saying, well, wait a minute, I want to grow, I want to hire more staff and things. So we have to be taking a look at it like that too, funding to help get more providers into our communities, but also funding to allow existing providers to grow so that they can continue to serve our communities.
Yeah, and as far as the child care issue is really reaching a crisis point. We're seeing, well, in particular in our area, we depend more heavily in our area on the home-based childcare system. In the Twin Cities, they've also had problems with losing the home-based childcare, but they've been able to make up for it with child care centers. That model works well in an area that has a significant population base to work with. But when you start getting out into the more rural areas of the state, that model doesn't work as well. And so the loss of home-based child care hasn't been replaced with the child care centers like it has in the metropolitan area of the Twin Cities. And so it's an even greater crisis in rural Minnesota than it has been in the cities. It's a crisis across the state, but it's especially pronounced out here in the more rural areas of Minnesota. And it's making it harder for our communities to survive economically because businesses rely upon workers who can find childcare for their children. And if they can't, they often leave those communities. So it's so critically important, not just for those that need childcare for their children, but for the communities generally. And I was impressed. I was part of a panel discussion that just dealt with childcare issues that was sponsored by the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities. They had their annual conference in Alexandria, and they said that they wanted to focus just on this issue alone. It was the first time, and I'd been on panel discussions previous years with the coalition as well, and we always dealt with a multitude of different issues. But they said, no, this year we're just going to focus on childcare because no matter who we talk to, this is the biggest issue that keeps coming up over and over and over again, and what an impact that's having on their communities. So it is becoming a major issue that needs to be addressed. There's no one silver bullet that's going to solve the problem. Ben had talked about CCAP. That's critically important that we maintain a strong CCAP program. And as Ben said, we do need to root out the fraud because that's been used as a reason to gut the program by some. And that's not the solution. That's just going to make things worse. So rooting out the fraud, but also making sure that we continue to invest in programs like that I do think we need to think outside the box more as well. Again, especially in the rural areas where we may not have as much opportunity for the child care center kind of model. But I've noticed, like, for instance, in Ada, they have a child care now that's being provided in the nursing home. And I think that that's a great model to follow, where you're bringing the generations together, and actually the seniors who are receiving care there, they love having young children in their presence as well. So, you know, it's kind of a win-win. And I think it's good for the children also. I think that we so too often get siloed into our own, you know, age groups, our own groups in society. I think we need to have more connection across the generations. And so that's one way to address that at the same time as we're addressing the childcare crisis that we're facing. And this kind of goes to another topic, but talking about senior care, I think one of the issues that we face with seniors in particular is the issue of social isolation, which has really been intensified now during this the pandemic. And that is such a critically important issue that hasn't gotten the attention that it deserves. You know, it's partly a result of the highly technological age that we live in. Families no longer living as close together, the extended families, as they once did. But social isolation is becoming another epidemic in our society that needs to be addressed, and how to again connect people, because we know that social isolation leads to an acceleration of decline, especially in those that are having cognitive problems. And so I think, again, this was one solution to childcare that also addressed that issue. And it's becoming a problem worldwide as far as social isolation. I remember during testimony in our Family Care and Aging Committee, one person testifying that they've actually created a department in Great Britain just to deal with this issue. They have a minister of loneliness that just deals with that issue because it's becoming such a problem. And I think it starts early. We need to make sure that children have opportunities to connect with each other, and don't spend as much time maybe on the computer and computer games, and more time with each other. And just one last thing on the issue of childcare. We do need to look at more than just, and Heather, you talked about this, it's not just a matter of having some place to drop your kid off. It's a matter of having good quality childcare as well, that does stimulate the mind and does allow for the interaction that I think is so critically important to developing those social skills in our children as well. So that needs to be part of the discussion here as well. And so cheap childcare is not the answer. Good quality childcare and access to that good quality childcare and making it affordable is the answer.
Well, and I think that you bring up, really, it breaks down to collaborative daycare. You know, I've read a lot about those combination centers. You know, for me growing up, just being part of the Indigenous culture, we just respect our elders so much. And there's this element of storytelling there that you don't learn from TV. You don't learn from books. You learn from sitting and listening to people as they talk about what life was like 70 years ago, 80 years ago, 90 years ago, or the stories that their parents and grandparents told them. You know, like when my son was little, they would go in and do, like, every other month they would sing. You know, their daycare was right around the corner, so they'd go over and do little concerts, and they loved it. And it was this great idea. But you're right, that's a collaboration piece that most communities have a center that's helping to support our elders, and then also a center or a space that's really helping to grow our youth and our littles in our community. So I love that idea. I think that that's a great way to engage people of all generations. The other thing that I just want to bring up that's kind of an area when it comes to the crisis part of childcare is the combination and the connection between childcare and having healthy placements for foster care. I was a foster mom for a while, and I particularly like taking babies, you know, like some people call me a little bit crazy, but like right from the hospital or like as newborns, just to try to give them a nurturing home as their families worked through things. But it is almost impossible to find a newborn spot in town. And so then therefore, like, it's hard to commit to doing foster care. And we need good, healthy foster care families for our kids that, you know, maybe there's an opportunity to look at some sort of funding or support for providers, you know, a couple providers in town to kind of consistently hold a spot for infants that are coming from crisis situations, or different things, so that we're also thinking more in lines of those really vulnerable populations and those kids who need good families. And sometimes those families are working families. And I don't think anybody should ever have to decide between career and family. I think as women, especially, we get pulled in that divide like way too often, that like, okay, do I want to excel in my career, or do I want to have and support a family? Like, it gets really hard because daycare is kind of that missing piece. Just for sake of time, I think that we have, Nicole, do we have a question in the question and answer?
We do. We have a question from Nico Arias, who is the student body president at MSUM. And the question is, how will you as current or future representatives how are you reaching out to college students? How will you fight to keep our university systems fully funded to help provide the amazing services that MSUM offers to the community? And I would just add also, I mean, it's an economic issue for Moorhead. You know, MSUM and the other higher education institutions provide a lot of jobs for us. And so I think that's a really great question.
Yeah, you're right. And I mean, Moorhead in particular, it's a college city. I mean, that's a big part of who we are in Moorhead and in this area. So it has a huge economic impact on our area. And we do need to invest more in higher education. And I've demonstrated and will continue to support more financial support for our higher ed institutions. It's not a cost to our state. It's an investment in our state and its future. It pays huge dividends. One of the reasons that we've enjoyed a high quality of life in our state is because of the investments we have made in higher education in the past. I think it's unfortunate that more recently in the early 2000s, we went through a series of years of budget deficits at the state level. And unfortunately, and I opposed this approach. I was in the House at the time, and they were cutting, basically shifting the problem off from the state onto our colleges, our schools, our local units of government, cities and counties, by cutting them. And when we cut higher education, it resulted in tuition skyrocketing. And we went from the state picking up 2/3 the cost of a higher education at our public institutions and the students picking up 1/3, to flipping to the students picking up 2/3 and the state only picking up 1/3. So with devastating consequences, it was placing college education out of reach for many. It was leaving those who did finish with college with enormous debt that they had to pay off. It was discouraging a lot of people who had a lot to offer, had tremendous abilities and talents, but didn't realize the full potential of those talents and those abilities because they were being discouraged for financial reasons. And that shouldn't be the reason. I don't believe that higher education should be free, but it should be affordable. And people should be able to work their way through college like they used to without, emerging with enormous debt to have to pay off. And so we need to get back to that 2/3 of the state picking up at least 2/3 of the cost of higher education. We've started to move back again, getting closer to 50-50, but we still aren't back to where we used to be. And if we're truly going to be providing opportunity for everyone, we need to at least get back to that 2/3, 1/3 split. And I would even go even further than that because I think it's so critically important that we not only remove barriers, but actively encourage young people to go to college and to go as far as they possibly can in their educational opportunities.
Yeah, I think that it's kind of goes back to that statement. When we invest in our youth, they're going to grow up and turn around and invest in our communities. And so
Right.
you know, it's not something that doesn't come back to really support and grow our communities. But I mean, I think the tuition freeze makes sense because you're right. Like it should never be put back on our students to get us out of a deficit that our students didn't necessarily play a role in. And we do need to be, again, back to the statement I said earlier, education should never be a privilege, you know, for some. It really needs to be this opportunity for all. And I agree with you, Senator. It's not something that I think needs to be free for everybody. But I do think that it needs to be achievable, and it needs to be something that people aren't, you know, afraid of because of the financial outcome of it. Ben, did you want to add anything onto that?
Not a lot. I mean, you just, I mean, at the end of the day, to me, it comes back to having the will to fight for things, and to fight for things that you feel are important, and to have the reasoning why you want to fight for those things from a political, fiscal perspective. You know, we have to be armed with the facts that show these are, like Senator Eken says, these are investments. This is not spending by the state. This is investing in our future, investing in our workforce, and investing in our communities. So it's really what it comes down to, having the will to fight for that funding.
Mm-hmm. So we just have a couple minutes left. I do think there was a question. Oh no, that was it. Okay, now I gotta get back. So sorry, I was trying to figure out if we missed a question or not in the Q&A, but just for sake of time, I want to let everybody know that we're only 56 days away from the general election, and mail ballots are going to be coming soon. From everything that we hear, they're going to be leaving the station on the 18th, so that means they should be in your houses if you've requested them already, you know, right around the 21st. And so you can always mail them back. You can drop them off at a couple different sites around the district. I think Nicole just put in on my website, we do have, so if you go to heatherforhouse.com/voting, we have all the links right there that you would need. So if you need a link to register to vote, or you need a link to request your mail ballot, or you want to find out where your polling place is, you can do all of that. We're trying to make it as easy as possible. We are not door knocking just because, you know, we really care about the health of our community. So we're doing a lot of phone banks. Kent, I think you guys are doing phone banks as well. So when can people get involved in your campaign, or how can they get involved to support you?
Well, I know you can contact me at votekenteken.com, and you can also contact, you know, Will Hagan has been working on both of our campaigns and has been organizing people in volunteer efforts to contact constituents and encourage them to vote in this election.
Yep. Sounds good. So our links are in the chat. We'll also put them over on our Facebook pages. But I think we're going to do this again. You know, I think that these conversations are really valuable. I know I learned a lot. I think that I could go on and have more conversations. Like I have so many notes that I've taken that I feel like I just need to kind of digest them, and we'll probably come back with more questions. But I think we've all agreed that we'll come back and do another town hall, maybe hosted on Kent's site, you know, in October or back here, because I do think it's important for the three of us to be in communication, but also to have the community be a part of that as well. So I appreciate everybody. I appreciate both of you for being here, and for everybody who's decided to tune in. Get out and vote. You know, I tell everybody that your voice is always important. I don't necessarily believe that like one election is more important than another, but I do think that this one is a pretty important election. And so in our community alone, we have a lot of seats that we're looking at. We have school board, we have city council, we have city county commission, we have state level, we have federal level. So just make sure that you get involved, ask questions, and just learn, because everybody's voice is extremely, extremely valuable. We are going to be doing some things with our new American population. So if language is something that is maybe a barrier for you and kind of understanding the process, reach out and let us know. We're working with a couple organizations and individuals in our community, but also across the state, to make sure that we're making voting as easy as possible. Thank you both for being here. Do you want to just quick say something in closing?
Well, I'd just like to say thank you, Heather, for hosting this and for the great work that you're doing. And as Bennett said earlier, I mean, your passion really shows through, and that's what we need in these positions. And I really appreciate the fact that you're willing to step forward, especially at this time. I think this is a critically important time, and it's hard to encourage people to get involved sometimes because politics has gotten uglier lately, but it's critically important to people's everyday lives. And so I appreciate your passion, and I look forward to working on the same team with you.
Thank you, Heather. Thank you, Nicole, for putting this all together. Senator, as always, good to see you.
Good
I
seeing
look
you,
forward
Ben.
to another opportunity for us to talk like this. Thank you.
Sounds good. Thanks, everybody. Have a good night. Be safe.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.